My name is Miriam Cole, a retired criminal court judge from Cedar Ridge, Ohio. And on most Fridays, I make roast chicken and try to keep the peace at my kitchen table. I thought I had seen every kind of violence from the bench. I was wrong. It arrived in a wine glass. The glass left Kendra's hand so fast I didn't see the throw, only the burst when it hit the cabinet behind me, the spray of red, and the sweet smell of Pinot cut with the metallic tang of my own blood. I heard Jason whisper, "Mom," in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 10 and fell off his bike. He stood there with his napkin in his fist, frozen. Kendra's chair scraped backward, her eyes bright, as if daring the room to contradict what had just happened. I pressed the heel of my palm to my temple and felt a shallow, burning line. My phone was on the counter next to the mashed potatoes. The 9 and the 1 came easy, and the second one felt like a betrayal I had prepared for years ago without admitting it. Kendra laughed to fill the silence. Too loud for a cozy house. Jason didn't move. "Enough," I said, one word, even and low. The siren began somewhere far off, a thin silver thread pulling tight through the autumn dark. As it drew closer, the kitchen shrank to the shine of broken glass on the floor and the single drop of wine traveling down the cabinet like a slow tear. And I realized that, for once, justice was coming to my own door. The sirens faded into the distance as I sat on the edge of my bed, pressing a square of gauze against my temple. The house smelled of wine and lemon cleaner. Jason stood in the doorway, pale and rigid, holding a towel he hadn't realized was streaked pink. I told him to throw it away. He nodded, left the room, and didn't come back for a long time. At Cedar Ridge Medical Center, the fluorescent lights were merciless. The nurse cleaned the cut and stitched 3 careful knots. I answered her questions with the calm that comes from decades of listening to people lie to themselves. "How did it happen?" she asked. "Family argument," I said. Jason sat beside me, staring at the tiled floor as if it might offer absolution. When the deputy arrived, I gave a statement concise enough to fit on a single page. Time, location, weapon, glass. He photographed my injury, the bracelet I still wore, and the faint reflection of my son behind me. I signed the report, steady hand, clean letters. The deputy thanked me for my clarity. I almost laughed. Kendra wasn't arrested that night. Jason had driven her home before the ambulance came. He said she was just upset. I let the silence that followed say everything he refused to hear. The stitches pulled when I raised my brow, a small reminder each time I tried to show restraint. Saturday morning, the kitchen looked staged, countertops wiped, the wine bottle gone, the floor gleaming as if an argument could be mopped up. I photographed the cabinet anyway, the chip in the wood, the stain on the grout, the single shard of glass caught under the radiator. I placed each fragment into a plastic bag, labeled it with masking tape and the date. Habit is a kind of prayer. Mine is evidence. Jason came by that afternoon, carrying groceries as peace offerings. He made soup, the way I used to when he was sick. Too much time, too much guilt. We ate in silence until I said her name. "Kendra?" The spoon froze midway to his mouth. "She didn't mean to," he began. She threw a glass, Jason, meaning stopped mattering the moment it left her hand. He looked up, and for the first time I saw the bruise beneath the collar of his shirt, faded yellow against the skin. "She gets angry," he said quietly. "Sometimes I say things the wrong way." There it was, the confession hidden inside a justification. I reached across the table but didn't touch him. "You can't out-reason someone who wants control," I said. "You can only draw a line." He exhaled, a sound half laugh, half surrender. "And what happens when you draw it? You see who steps over it." On Sunday, I couldn't sit still. I baked bread, rearranged the silverware drawer, refolded towels that didn't need refolding. Around noon, I called the River County Sheriff's Office to confirm my report had been logged. It had. The deputy mentioned that if I wanted a protection order, I could file Monday morning at Domestic Relations Court. I thanked him, even though gratitude felt misplaced. That night, I wrote out the timeline on yellow legal paper. Every call, every bruise I had noticed, every excuse Jason had made. Writing it down turned chaos into paragraphs, and paragraphs are easier to face. When I finished, I placed the page inside an envelope with the photographs and the ER discharge form. The folder looked ordinary on my desk, the way a verdict looks ordinary until it's read aloud. Monday came gray and cold. I drove myself downtown, parked across from the courthouse, where I'd spent half my life listening to strangers try to explain why they'd done what they'd done. Inside, the clerk recognized me, but pretended not to. That kindness was worth more than any apology. I filled out the petition, incident, witnesses, injuries, and checked the box that asked for no contact. The judge, a man I'd trained years ago, read the file carefully, then met my eyes. "Do you feel unsafe, Judge Cole?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because admitting it made it true. "Yes," I said. "I do." He signed the temporary protection order and handed it back to me with both hands, as if it were fragile. The paper was warm from the copier. Outside, the air smelled of rain and exhaust. I folded the order once and slipped it into my coat pocket. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding a gavel or giving instruction. I was holding a line drawn for myself. That afternoon, Jason texted to ask how it went. I told him simply, "It's done." He replied, "Okay." No apology, no defense, just the smallest word that could still carry a son's relief. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the glass had shattered, and watched the sunlight bend through the new pane of glass I'd already replaced. The seam was almost invisible. Almost. Banks have their own kind of silence. It isn't the peaceful kind. It's the kind that hums beneath the carpet and smells faintly of toner. When Jason and I walked into First Prairie Bank, he looked like a man who had rehearsed a confession he didn't want to give. I introduced us to Ava Nguyen, the financial advisor, a woman with calm eyes and a folder, thicker than my patience. She asked if we wanted to sit. I said yes before Jason could answer. With Jason's permission, Ava pulled up a year of statements. At first glance, it was ordinary life. Groceries, car insurance, the occasional dinner at a chain restaurant. But then she turned a page, and the air shifted. A home equity line of credit for $120,000, a personal loan for $70,000, 2 new store cards, both opened on weekdays when Jason was at work. Jason's jaw moved like he was chewing air. "She said the kitchen needed remodeling," he murmured. "She wanted to add value to the house." Ava leaned forward. "Did the remodeling happen?" I almost laughed. The only thing that changed in that kitchen was the mood. Ava didn't smile. She circled numbers with a red pen and slid the papers toward us. "You should file disputes on these," she said softly, "and freeze all credit lines in both names. If she's opening accounts in yours, this will at least slow her down." Jason nodded, hands trembling. He wasn't angry yet, not at her, not at himself. He was something worse, ashamed. When we left the bank, the January air slapped us clean. I waited until we were in the car to speak. "Jason, this isn't carelessness. It's theft." He stared at the windshield. "She said I didn't trust her. She said I made her feel small." "Abuse doesn't need volume," I said. "It just needs permission." That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the way he'd sat there, eyes fixed on the paperwork, shoulders caving inward. When he was little, he used to hide under the kitchen table during storms. I used to tell him thunder was just the sky rearranging itself, but this storm had a human face. By Tuesday, I called an old friend, Owen Briggs, a retired detective who now did private consultations. He came by with his yellow notebook and the patience of someone who'd seen too many kinds of denial. I laid out the statements and Ava's notes across my kitchen table. He studied them the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. "She's messy, not clever," Owen said. "There's a clear pattern: cash advances on his night shifts, online transfers to her private account, then payments to luxury stores. It's classic financial control. Drain the partner, then isolate them." Jason sat across from us, fingers laced, face pale. "Can you prove it?" "We can show it," Owen said. "Whether you want to press charges is up to you." Jason looked at me then, not as a son looking for rescue, but as a man asking for permission to believe what he already knew. "What do I do now?" "You start by changing the locks," I said, "and you stop apologizing for her behavior." He gave a small, broken laugh. "You make it sound easy. It isn't. It's just right." The next few weeks blurred into paperwork and quiet bravery. Ava helped Jason file fraud disputes and close compromised accounts. Owen traced transactions through ATM cameras that showed Kendra withdrawing money during Jason's overnight shifts. The evidence stacked neatly, but emotions never do. Jason moved into a small apartment near the paper mill. I paid for the U-Haul. He paid the rent. He said it made him feel like a grown man again, and I didn't remind him that he always had been. One night, after unpacking, he stopped by with a box of cookbooks she'd never opened. We stood in the kitchen, the same one she'd tried to remodel, and he handed me a photograph of them at their wedding. The smile too wide to be honest. He looked at it for a long moment, then tore it once, twice, into clean halves. "She threw things before," he said. "A plate, once. The phone. I told myself she was tired." "And you?" I asked. "I was tired, too." He tossed the pieces into the trash, then fixed the loose hinge on my cabinet door. The click it made when it shut was small, but final. After he left, I wrote in my notebook, "Some evidence heals by sound." The following Sunday, the house smelled of lavender polish and chicken stock again. I placed the folder with all the documents, statements, photos, copies of the TPO on the hall table where I couldn't ignore it. Justice begins with paperwork, but peace begins when you stop pretending. I think I finally understood that. Courthouses have their own smell: dust, old paper, an anxiety that never quite airs out. When I walked into River County Court that morning, I felt it all in my bones. The benches were polished but nicked, like people who'd learned how to shine over their scars. Jason sat beside me in the second row, silent. His hands were steady, but his knee kept moving, a small rebellion against stillness. When Kendra entered, she wore a soft gray sweater that wasn't hers. I recognized it, Jason's. Her face was pale, clean, almost angelic, the way people look when they've had a night to practice remorse in the mirror. The deputy led her to the defense table, and she sat with her shoulders squared, as if this were merely an inconvenience. The prosecutor read the charges: misdemeanor assault, violation of domestic peace, property damage. It sounded clinical. Nothing like the flash of glass or the sound of Jason's voice when he said my name that night. The defense asked for leniency, painting her as a stressed woman who'd had too much wine, too little understanding. When the judge asked if the victim wished to speak, I rose. "My name is Miriam Cole," I said, keeping my voice even. "I was injured by my daughter-in-law during a family meal. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern that finally reached the surface." Kendra's eyes darted toward me, sharp and wet. "That's not true," she whispered to her attorney, but the microphone carried it just enough. The judge warned her to remain silent. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. The court issued a new no-contact order, stricter than before. No texts, no phone calls, no emails, no visits within 500 feet of either of us. Kendra nodded, her jaw trembling just enough to make the performance believable. The next date was set, and the deputy guided her out. The courtroom door closed with a hush that felt heavier than any gavel. Outside, Jason stopped near the vending machine, staring at the coins in his palm. "She looked so small," he said. "She always was," I answered, "but that's not the same as harmless." He nodded slowly, like someone measuring the weight of a truth he'd avoided. "I thought I could fix her." "You can't fix a storm, Jason, you just move out of the rain." For the first time, he didn't argue. We stood there in silence. Two people who'd survived the same house from different angles. That night, Owen called with an update. He'd found a record out of Indiana, an old protective order from Kendra's previous relationship. Violation, late-night disturbance, dismissed after the ex-boyfriend moved away. Patterns don't convict, but they tell the truth you already sense. I thanked him and sat for a long time at the kitchen table, staring at the printout. Jason needed to see it, but not tonight. Some knowledge has to arrive in daylight. The next evening, he came by carrying a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, his version of a peace offering. We made French toast and ate it at the counter. No plates, just forks and napkins. He told me he'd joined a men's support group at the community center, the kind that meets in the church basement with stale coffee and hard chairs. He said they didn't make him talk, but he did anyway. I said I was scared, he told me, eyes on the toaster, and nobody laughed. They just nodded. "That's how healing starts," I said. He smiled, not the thin, apologetic smile I'd grown used to, but something rounder, freer. "You know what's strange?" he asked. "When she's quiet now, it's not peaceful. It's just empty. And I think I like empty better." We washed the dishes together. The hinge he'd fixed clicked smoothly when I closed the cabinet. Outside, the streetlight came on, soft and ordinary. I thought about how peace never announces itself with trumpets. It just sits quietly in the spaces violence used to fill. That's what this moment felt like. Not triumph, not revenge, just a silence I could finally trust. The first snow of February was still falling when the knock came. It wasn't timid. It was the kind of pounding that carries its own argument. I looked through the sidelight window and saw Kendra, hair wild, a bottle dangling from one hand, the other raised for another blow. She shouted my name, then Jason's, slurring the words into one long cry. I didn't open the door. I lifted my phone instead and pressed record on the Ring camera before dialing 911. The dispatcher knew my voice. Small towns make patterns, too. "She's outside again," I said. "Violating the protection order." "Stay inside, ma'am. Units are en route." Kendra paced the porch, her breath white against the dark glass. "You think you can take him from me?" she yelled. "You think a piece of paper makes you safe?" The wine bottle struck the railing, splintering. She didn't notice the sirens yet, neither did I. Through the thin door, I heard her start to cry, then laugh, that same high pitch that used to fill my kitchen when she wanted attention. "You always hated me," she said, voice breaking. "You always wanted him back." The first cruiser turned the corner, blue lights strobing across the snow. She froze when the spotlight hit her. "Kendra Hale," the deputy called. "You're under arrest for violating a protective order." She dropped the bottle. It rolled to the step. the red wine seeping into the snow like a slow bruise. I stayed by the window as they cuffed her, reading her rights in the polite rhythm of procedure. She didn't fight, didn't cry now, just stared at the house as if memorizing the shape of it for later. When the car door shut, the night went utterly still. Owen arrived 10 minutes later, uninvited but expected. He checked the porch, photographed the shards, collected the bottle. "You did the right thing," he said. "I did the only thing." My voice shook despite myself. The next morning, the prosecutor called. They would request she be held without bail until review. Repeated violation, alcohol, previous history. Jason came by after his shift, gray from exhaustion. He hadn't slept since the call from the sheriff's office. "She keeps doing this because she thinks I'll bail her out," he said. "Will you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not this time." For the first time since that dinner, he looked older than his years, but also steadier. I made coffee, black and strong, and we drank it in silence while the morning news murmured in the background. When he left, I stepped onto the porch. The snow had hardened overnight, covering the stains with a thin, glassy crust. Beneath it, the marks would stay until the thaw. That was fine. Some things should last long enough to be remembered. 2 weeks after the arrest, the plea hearing was scheduled. River County Court looked the same as it always had. Neutral walls, a clock that never quite matched real time, but that morning, it felt smaller. Jason sat beside me again, a folder of documents clutched to his chest like armor. Kendra was brought in wearing county orange, her hair pulled back, her eyes dull. The woman who once demanded attention now seemed to fold in on herself. The prosecutor summarized the case: violation of a protective order, assault, financial exploitation under investigation. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered. She nodded. The judge asked, "Ms. Hale, how do you plead?" "Guilty," she said. 2 syllables, flat as paper. A soft gasp came from somewhere behind us. The court reporter stopped typing for a heartbeat, then continued. The plea deal was read aloud: 90 days in county jail, 2 years of probation, mandatory alcohol treatment, restitution to Jason for verified losses, and a 5-year no-contact order. The judge asked if the victims wished to speak. Jason rose. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. "For a long time, I thought silence kept things peaceful," he said. "But silence just made her louder. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." He sat down, breathing hard, eyes bright but dry. I reached for his hand, but he shook his head lightly. "I've got it, Mom." When the gavel came down, it wasn't loud. It was almost gentle, as if the judge knew that real punishment had already begun long before this morning. Kendra didn't look at us when they led her away. The chain at her wrist clinked once against the bench, and that tiny sound felt like closure. Outside, the air smelled of thawing snow and diesel from the courthouse buses. Jason exhaled, long and slow. "So that's it?" he asked. "That's justice," I said. "Not loud, not clean, just final." He nodded, and for the first time, his shoulders didn't curve forward. We walked to the car without looking back. Behind us, the courthouse bell marked the hour, one clear note rolling through the gray sky, the sound of an ending that also knew how to stop. Spring came late that year. The snow melted in uneven patches, leaving the yard patchy and raw, but the lavender I'd planted by the porch pushed through anyway, small, stubborn, violet gray. Jason visited on Sundays now, bringing groceries and stories from the paper mill. The bruises had faded long before, but the way he stood, upright, shoulders easy, was the truest evidence of healing I'd ever seen. He talked about a man in his support group who'd started painting again, another who'd taken his daughter camping for the first time in years. "They all say the same thing," Jason told me. smiling over his mug of coffee. Once you stop apologizing for someone else's chaos, you remember what quiet feels like. I looked at him and thought about how justice isn't a hammer or a headline. It's a slow, deliberate rebuild, the steady way a person relearns peace. That night, I wrote a letter I'll never send, thanking Kendra for one small thing. She taught my son where the line really is. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled clean, the kind that belongs to no one. The lavender swayed in the dark, and for the first time in a long while, I let the silence stay. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.